Hola y bienvenido. Hello and welcome to Thursdays for the Soul. Thursdays for the Soul is a webinar series for the whole church. We faithfully focus on care and education for the people of God and create opportunities to digitally worship together as the whole of the United Church of Christ. From prayer, music, and psalms to interviews of key leaders and how-tos in congregational life, this series stays current to the relevant topics of the time, offers opportunities of connection in the wider church and in your community. Together, we can bring our church and the world towards the world God imagines for all of us. Buen dia. I am the Reverend Roberto Ochoa, Minister for Ethnic Inclusion and Congregational Support for Rural and Small Churches of the Faith, Education, Innovation, and Formation Ministry Team, otherwise called as Faith Info, with the Justice and Local Church Ministries of the United Church of Christ. Gracias for joining us today. We are so pleased to present Intergenerational Advent Planning with the board members of the Association of the United Church Educators, known as AUCE. However, before we get to today's session, let me tell you about what we have up next in the series. Next Thursday on October 20th, please join us for Just World Covenant, Thursdays for the Soul, as Reverend Noe Anderson, UCC's coordinator for immigrants' rights, presents a panel discussion on how to become local immigrant welcoming congregations. A conversation so needed as more and more refugees and immigrants are being transported to many of our cities and towns from some of our border states. We will learn important ways on how we as a local church can help aid with so many in need. And on October 27th, Thursdays for the Soul presents How to Protect Your Digital Information, a practical discussion of digital privacy. Considering Dobbs' decision that abortion is not a protected right under the Constitution, having a firm grasp of digital privacy is all the more important. Knowing who has access to your online life, from period trackers to grocery apps and social media, and what companies can do with that information is critical. This session will help empower and inform congregations and individuals to take practical steps to protect their digital privacy and provide context about what is happening in the digital privacy space. All our Thursdays for the Soul digital programs begin at 9:30 a.m. Hawaiian, 11:30 a.m. in Alaska, 12:30 Pacific, 1:30 Mountain, 2:30 Central, and 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Dear friends, if these hours inspire you in any way, and you would like to continue supporting ministries like this, consider donating to the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. That's by texting UCC to 41444. Thank you. Now for today's program, Intergenerational Advent Planning. Christmas is around the corner, and today we are fortunate to have members of the Association of the United Church Educators, known as AUCE, Board of Director members, as they share about creative intergenerational faith formation ideas for and during Advent. So, I'm looking forward to today's program. Bienvenido, Reverend Dr. Tom Bauer, and members of the Board of AUCE. We are thrilled having you on Thursdays for the Soul today. So we look forward for your discussions and ideas. And take it away, Dr. Tom.
Gracias, Roberto. On behalf of the board of the Association of United Church Educators, and I'm going to stop myself right there and say that's so long to say, as Roberto said, also called AUCE. That is our preferred name, AUCE. On behalf of the AUCE Board of Directors, welcome. We're glad you're joining us for this conversation. We hope you'll look at our website, which is AUCE-UCC.org. You can find additional resources there. You'll find information about becoming a member of AUCE, which will open up other parts of that website and more resources. Today's webinar is going to be around 4 questions that our panelists will respond to. And we're going to invite you to use the chat. You will be additional panelists for this conversation. But I'm going to also say, as you put into the chat, it's really hard for us as respondents and panelists and me as facilitator to be monitoring the chat and responding to it quickly. So for the first part, we're not going to be responding to that because we're then leading after the 4 queries to a time of questions and responses. And that's when we'll ask those who are in the Zoom applications to go ahead and put in the questions and our panelists will respond. And our first query is, panelists, what is your name? What is your ministry setting? What's your role on the AUCE board? Kristen.
Well, hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you, Tom, to start us off. My name is Kristen Putney, and I am the Director of Faith Formation, Youth, and Family Ministries at my local church. I've been there many, many years in SNEUCC, Massachusetts. And my role on the AUCE board is I am the representative of the New England states. Pass it on to Scott.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Jacquel Scott, and I'm commonly known in this space as Scott. I serve as the program coordinator for Sister Chapel here at Spelman College. And as far as the AUCE board, I serve as the Southern representative for the AUCE board, representing the Southern states. So anybody from the South? I'm going to pass it to Tom.
I am Tom Bauer. I live in the Chicago area, but I'm currently serving Faith Mennonite Church in Minneapolis as transitional pastor. I am currently the chair of the AUCE board, and it is an honor, and I am humbled to be in that role. Kim, will you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Reverend Kim Nagy, and I'm the Director of Faith Formation at Church of the Redeemer United Church of Christ in Westlake, Ohio, which is just west of Cleveland. I am the Vice Chair of AUCE right now, and Advent is my favorite liturgical season. So I am so glad to be here with you all and excited about our conversation today. Back to you, Tom.
Before we get into Kim's excitement of Advent, I want to make sure that we talk some about intergenerational faith formation. So the first query panel, how is intergenerational faith formation different from getting everyone in one room and doing something? Kristen, will you start us?
Great place to begin, Tom. Great place, because having a group of people together, you think already you got the people there, but how is it different with intergenerational ministry? And so right off the top, I think about this group and I think of 3 particular parts to it that are really important that separate it from just a group of people together. And the first thing is within this group of people across all generations, you would have this mutual benefit that everyone in the room would have a benefit to the experience, not just one particular group. And so because of that, having the experience kind of like a give and receive, the continual give and receive. So not one group is giving and the other group is receiving, or age group. And then, of course, everyone being valued equally, so important. All voices are heard. A phrase that I love to hear is doing life together, right? In that church setting, in that beautiful setting with all the generations, learning together, growing together, serving together. And then one other thing that I think is really important when I think of intergenerational, I think about the congregation. And as you educate your congregation about having an intergenerational ministry, I think about the baptismal vow that parents make, but also the congregation. And oftentimes we may not think to lift that up, but that's part of it as we nurture the children, all of us together, remembering the baptismal vow. And by doing that, everybody's involved, all of the congregants, and they're all role models, right, for your children as you're raising them in your church setting. And I love, for the Southern New England Conference on the website, Debbie Glein Allen has curated a beautiful section on intergenerational ministry And so we do have our different resources will be at the bottom of the screen, or they will be available later. But there's a lovely outline of a lot of the information I just shared with you. I'm going to pass it on to Scott.
Thank you, Miss Kristen. I love you, by the way. One of the things that I want to draw on is what Miss Kristen is saying. I want to amplify that there's a difference between just being intentional about intergenerationality and also just doing something, right? One is a practice and one is an assignment. And I think oftentimes with DCEs or Christian educators, we get lost in trying to discern what is the assignment and what is the practice. And with that being stated, you cannot do a practice without first immersing yourself within that community which you're serving. And a great way to do that is with consent, of course, is to invite yourself to community gatherings, partner with local organizations and community organizers that are in your community that are doing the work to amplify the marginalized voices that are already there. One thing about God and all of God's glory is God is not going to necessarily bring in new information when you have the resource right there. You have it there. And we see that within scriptures with the raven and the prophet and with the widow and the oil and the stories goes on. But God, there's something special about providing with what we already have, right? And like I said, with consent, something that really bothers me is, especially in the pandemic, we wanted to be the social justice warriors, right? And a lot of times we did a lot of harm than we did good because we invited ourselves into communities, for example, Native American communities, trying to help, and it didn't necessarily work out that way. And a great way to amplify those voices that are in our community, I like to call them hidden figures. And the great way to amplify those hidden figures in our community is to bring it to what we already have, Christmas pageants. Amplify the voices of Black, queer women, children, elders. Amplify those voices in these settings and allow God to do what God does best, which is perform miracles. But yeah, I think when it comes to being intentional about intergenerational AVID planning specifically, there's a difference between, immersing yourself into that community and enabling this practice or embodying this practice rather, versus just doing something because your committee assigned this to you. We all know what that feels like when your Christian education committee come to you and say, we need this done. Okay, how can I take this task and then turn that into a practice, something that I believe, something that I walk in daily, and something that I love? Tom, it looks like you want to add to that, so I'm going to pass it to you.
I love that you're using the word intentionality, because that's one of my words about the teaching ministry. It is an intentional relationship. I think there is a difference between multi-generational and intergenerational. Multi-generational still honors that we have different lifespan needs. And so we might all be in the same room, we might have a similar activity, but the adults are doing it different than the children or the teens, or perhaps some other age group separated there. I think in intergenerational activities, we're doing this together. We are learning with one another. We're not separated. Now, learning with one another does not mean that we're necessarily learning the exact same thing. When I take my grandchildren to a museum, they're learning something different than what I'm learning, but we're learning with one another. And I think that's what intergenerational teaching and learning in the church can be. We admit we're at different places in our faith development, and yet wherever you are in your faith development, there's something for us to learn together. And that's my vision then for intergenerational. I also believe intergenerational faith formation takes a big change when the adults in the room admit we have things to learn from the children and the teens. When the adults say our faith is not yet complete and they have something that helps me grow. That's That's my ultimate goal in intergenerational faith formation, is to move the adults to that level of awareness. Kim, what else would you like to add?
I just want to echo what everybody has said so far, that there's an intentionality to doing intergenerational Advent with the people in our congregations, and that it's all about the relationships. I led a youth group that was our theme. That was our tagline. It's all about the relationships. And so I'm going to get into Advent just a little bit, because I'm all about the practical and giving examples. So for example, in Advent, everybody likes to color, right? Lots of people like to sit down and color together. And so taking the time to sit down and have a conversation with one another while you're doing an activity like coloring, or at an Advent workshop where there is not an adult teaching a child or a youth, but as Tom said, we are all coming and learning with one another. Trying to find those spaces where relationships can be built and we can be intentional about those things. Tom, back to you.
Thank you, panelists. We're familiar with the themes of Advent, of preparation, anticipation, expectation, hope, love, joy, peace. So as you are planning to engage those themes, what do you consider when planning intergenerational faith formation events? Kristen, begin us again, please.
Great. Well, definitely, Kim, that word intentionality, one of my most favorite words. In everything that we do at our church and in general, when you show intention, it's so inviting. It's just a beautiful way. It's part of the hospitality. So thinking about intentionality, I think I like to think about remembering traditions and offering rituals. And I was thinking about every year we offer different things. Might be the living creche, it might be an Advent wreath activity, it might be the hanging of the greens, and it never gets old, right? It's an old story, right? Advent is certainly about an old story, but it doesn't get old because it's a tradition, it's a ritual that you have in your church setting. However, I think we are learning, certainly with COVID, that we can still have all the traditional pieces, but with a new flair, right? With, I think about during COVID, how we continued to do the live crash outside, but we did a drive-through in the parking lot and it worked out beautifully. So thinking in terms of that, but having a new lens perhaps, and thinking, offering a different view would be very helpful as we move into this Advent season. One thing that I think is really important, and I think about where we are after COVID, and churches are transitioning, they're changing, they're offering other ways to do church beyond the church walls. So I think about, as an educator, taking the opportunity, again, intentional, but reaching out to families, perhaps people that you haven't seen in a while or that don't attend regularly. But to me, this is a time, a reason to reach out, phone calls are amazing, but a text, an email, probably several different ways, but to take the time and say, I miss you, and would you be a part of this? And creating, with the idea of a very intentional intergenerational ministry, maybe grouping people together, perhaps a former confirmand and their mentor, or with youth and deacons, different opportunities that are really laid out beautifully to involve all the ages and to remember and experience Advent once again. Let's see. Just an example, again, another favorite tradition is we did it during COVID, but we sent out packets. A lot of people did that. And it was the paper white bulb. But how exciting that could be if you're involving the whole church, intergenerational, and having an activity, whether it's in person or available, they can take it home, but to experience the waiting during Advent and how beautiful the paper white bulb. It takes time. You can share how it is growing. And then the beauty, if it's done in the very beginning of Advent, that it could blossom at Christmas. Or if they wait a week, it could be Epiphany or the New Year. But those stories can be shared during coffee hour, and the experience is shared with everyone. Well, those are just a few things, but I am sure, Scott, you have a few more things to say. Would you take over?
Yes, thank you. I don't want us to lose sight of what Advent really is, okay? Because yes, we do celebrate preparation, anticipation, and expectation during Advent, but just from someone that's looking, like Miss Kristen said, from a different lens at this story, I think it goes beyond that. It goes beyond the hope and the expectations. Let's just pause where we are, and let's just think about what Advent is. Not necessarily Epiphany. We're not getting to when Jesus is actually born, but let's just take a journey on Mary's labor pains. We forget that Mary was human. Mary experienced Jesus through a human pregnancy, the kicks, the late nights, maybe the different craving of appetites, you know? And on top of all of this, she was 14 years old. Teenage pregnancy to someone that has to raise Messiah. And not only that, I don't want to get too far into this, but it was a feminine energy that hovered over Mary when we say the Holy Ghost. A feminine energy. For all of those who are not necessarily affirming with the queer people, a feminine energy that hovered Mary. And from there, let's not forget that Joseph was not the greatest baby daddy, okay, or stepdaddy. Joseph said, I'm going to dismiss her privately so that she doesn't get embarrassed publicly, right? But when I look at that story, it seems as though that he was looking out for himself. So within this Advent narrative, we have the marginalized living there. Why are we still telling the Advent story through a white lens? Let's just call it out. And one of the greatest things that I've learned is if we continue to adopt the story of the oppressor, we will never get free. So how do we bring, like I said, from the last question, the experiences of the marginalized communities, women, people of color, Black, because there's a difference, right? But the LGBTQ, how do we bring those experiences into Advent? Because they're there. So when I look in this story, I don't necessarily just see this story of preparation and anticipation and hope. Maybe, however, I see a story of transparency, a story of labor pains, a story of oppression within the margin. How can we bring those stories to our Christmas pageant? One of the great things that I used to do when I was a youth minister was when it was time for a Christmas pageant, I give it back to the youth. You tell me what we need to do. I was a part of Intergenerational Avid playing, right? And the last Christmas pageant that I put together, we captured the stories. I know it's kind of Epiphany, but follow me with it. The stories of the three wise men using the lens of three political women. Things that they already wrestle with in their everyday lives. Things that they see every day. We have this notion that church is separate from state, or church, the sacred is separate from that which is secular, quote unquote. But what happens when God dwells in our fantasies and our realities? Translation, in the margins. When God met Mary, when God met Joseph, when God walked with Mary during the journey. For me, that's more beautiful than the baby being born. How God just dwelled with us in the midst of our suffering. And friends, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Black and brown people have experienced Advent all year. And this is the time that you give them hope that God, Elroy, sees you. But Tom, I don't want to make it too deep. I'm gonna give it to you.
Thank you. Given that I am a proponent of learning with one another, I am also a proponent of experiential teaching learning. And that is more than giving an activity. It is often described as that action reflection praxis. It's more than that. There's enough here for a webinar or a graduate degree in experiential teaching learning. But the core is we use the experience of something and reflect on it and use that reflection to move us into further learning. So as I'm planning interfaith events, I start with what is the shared action? What's the shared activity? But then I'm aware of different learners coming into this activity with different lifespan concerns, different life experiences, different information that they've had before. And so often alongside of the instructions for the activity, I provide some suggestions for further conversation or further interaction. For me, community is always the content and the process and the outcome of faith formation. But not everybody knows how to do community innately. And so our congregations and our congregational members sometimes need those nudges of how to be a healthy community. And that's the second resource I'm laying alongside the directions for this specific activity. And as I create those, I'm very aware that I want some of those to be about children, and some of those I want to tailor directed to the adults. And some of those are tailored to the adults in the congregation who have been to seminary. And some of those are towards the teenagers. And many of those are about how do we interact around this activity. The interaction is what I'm trying to coach alongside the activity. That's how I plan intergenerational faith events. Kim, share with us your wisdom.
Thank you all. Wow, there is so much wisdom on this panel. I'm just taking it all in as I'm preparing for my next speaking time. So when I am planning intergenerational Advent activities, there are a few different things that I consider. One is, don't forget about your college students. So often, our college students are left out, especially because they might be gone during the program year, and they're home usually during the Advent season. And it's important to remember them, to invite them to be part of those activities, to invite them to be part of worship. Don't forget about your college students. They are there, they are present. Draw them in if they are willing and able. Don't forget about your college students. Something else that I consider when planning intergenerational Advent is, this is the busiest time of year for families, besides maybe like that May end of the school year time. Make things simple. If you are going to send a box home with families that has Advent stuff in it to do at home, include everything. I don't know if you've all heard of those Kiwico subscription boxes for kids of all ages. One of the things they tout is that they have literally everything in the box so that you don't have to run out and get the glue dots, get the crayons. Make sure you're doing this kind of thing with stuff that you send home, like Advent boxes, because it makes it much easier for families to sit down and do something together if they've already got all of the materials in front of them and ready to go. So make things simple. Also, on this same vein, don't pack the church calendar and expect a whole bunch of families to show up during this time of year. I have to say it, and because I have been there, right? We have caroling on this Sunday. Next Sunday, we're going to have the youth Christmas party. Then we're going to have the Christmas pageant. And then week after week, you get these different crowds, but you never get everybody together because gosh, we all know this, that Sunday is one of the days where families are either doing sports or other activities, or it's the day that they just take a moment to breathe or finish their homework before the school week starts. And so in this very busy time of year, that intentional word, again, be intentional about what kind of intergenerational events you're putting on your church calendar. Pick one or two important things, and then promote, encourage people to show up for those things. One more thing that I encourage you all to do when you consider planning intergenerational Advent is we are online now more than ever. Use that to your advantage. Glossy, our Great Lakes Association of United Church Educators, just met last week, and we were sitting around a table joking, 3 years ago when we were here for the last time in person, who would have ever thought we would all be talking about our live stream issues? Like, it just wasn't in the realm of possibility for so many of us 3 years ago. And so now we have these capabilities. Use them to your advantage. Can you do a little podcast for Advent so families on the go can pop that on their Bluetooth in the car? What can you send home to people of all ages that they can use at home? And then what simple practices can you model and then post to your YouTube page, your Facebook page, your Instagram, your Twitter, your TikToks, whatever you guys are using in your social media realms? Use that to your advantage to engage people of all ages during the Advent season. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you all for those insights. And the third query is, where do you go for your ideas and resources, particularly for Advent? And then how do you adapt those ideas? And panel, I want to let you know we're just a couple of minutes behind our schedule, so just be aware of the time. Where do you go for ideas, Kristen?
Wonderful. Well, Kim, you mentioned about bringing the group together, the different ages, and coloring, and offering that opportunity while they're coloring to have a conversation, maybe offer topics. And so certainly Illustrated Ministry has amazing coloring sheets, mural sheets. They have, you can make a nativity, cut it together. Another place that is fabulous, Tracy Smith, she offers Treasure Box Tuesday. There's the book, amazing book. And then she also offers a free email, weekly email of incredible resources. I save them all. I go back a year. She just this past Tuesday had one all about Advent. So she's great, involved. She has children. She ministers to so many people. Highly recommend that. And let's see, yeah, and the book itself. So one thing though, just to keep in mind, how do you adapt it? Really, Kim, everything that you said about keeping it simple, being realistic, putting yourself in the shoes of families and the different age groups, how can you meet them where they are? Tom, you mentioned, you know, the way of learning, and that you might present one thing, but how does it serve all the different ages? How does it teach them in all different ways? So I just think of those three parts: mutual benefits, the give and receive back and forth, and then all voices heard. I'll pass it on to Scott.
Awesome. For me, I like to think of my resources as a melting pot, because I don't pull one thing from one place, if that makes sense. And specifically as it relates to Advent, Christian educators, is the time of year for you to be the most creative you. There's not a lot of materials around Advent because this is your time to shine. So if you needed permission to shine around Advent, here it is, right? But outside of that, my resources, try to keep them short. But I think that you should start with your method. How are we engaging the Spirit? How are we engaging teaching and learning? Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire is one of my favorite, because he takes apart what we consider this, or what he calls this banking system of us just spitting out knowledge and you just saying, oh, this is what this is. versus you inviting your own lived experiences into what you learn. And that way you become the teacher and the student, you know, that nobody is just a teacher. So even though that you are the Christian educator, you're not the teacher. Your students are teachers as well. This thing called teaching and learning is a cycle. So I highly recommend that. And then my resources will be at the bottom of the screen for those who are watching via YouTube. Outside of that, we have to think about Advent is literally a Christian holiday. So why not go to lectionaries, right? And one of my favorite lectionaries is by Dr. Gaffney, Wilna Gaffney. She writes a woman lectionary for the entire church. She currently have year ANW out. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend. Please check her out. She is fantastic. And then outside of that, commentaries. Now, I will be a little hypocritical if I tell you that you must engage the voices of those in your community, and it doesn't necessarily reflect within what our studies. So I like to use the Interpreter's Bible Commentary as well as the Queer Bible Commentary, which will also be at the bottom of the screen for you all, just as a tool for hermeneutics when I'm studying. And then outside of that, I wish somebody would have told me this when I graduated seminary. But believe it or not, I had no idea about Lifeway and Cokesbury. So you may think that it's something as simple as like ordering supplies, but you'll be surprised how many people don't know about that resource. So please look into those type of resources. And then outside of this, and Tom, I'm going to pass it to you. But another way to be very intentional, especially around Advent season, a lot of my resources that are dropping in the book, that are dropped in the chat, comes from Harriet's bookstore, which is a Black-owned bookstore. Support Black businesses. Support minority businesses as well when you get these resources. Yes, the library is great, but it will be fantastic for these Black businesses to know that you are thinking of them when you go to purchase your commentary. Let's leave Amazon alone for now because we have other options, right? And they will deliver them to you. So let's be very intentional about our Advent planning. But Tom.
We did not rehearse our responses before this event, and Scott, you just keep giving me the segues I need because I am a big fan of using the lectionary. And so 30 years ago, I created a file folder for every Sunday of year A and B and C, and I just keep dropping papers in there. And I kind of regret that now because I'm trying to digitize all that so it's easier to search. And it's hard to go through 3 large drawers on a filing cabinet to get all of that in. But having those files is one of the first places I go. That's not a resource that you all can access. I'm sorry, I'd love to get it out there for you. But the point here is collect all through the year. Right about this time of year, every year, there starts to be a glut of Christmas activity books and from Christian publishers, Advent books, and it's the wrong time of year. I have a note in my June calendar that comes up every year saying start Advent planning. And in August, I have one that says get the group together to start Advent planning. And with those notes, I will confess that I have yet to get a group together for 2022 Advent. It's just been that kind of fall. Plan ahead is the resource I go to because the more ideas you have, the more you can discard because they're bad ideas and you get the better ideas. There's my resource. Not the kind I think you were looking for as a go to a publisher and get this, but there's my resource. Kim, add to it.
So I just want to echo Kristen said, illustrated ministry. I love illustrated ministry. Every year, this time of year, they put out nativity sticker sheets that don't have a white Jesus, friends, because Jesus was not white. And so that is something that you won't see elsewhere. I really love how their illustrations have a proper representation of the Holy Family. I also want to lift up the Tracy Smith Faithful Families book. And in this book, it says that you are permitted to excerpt up to 5 prayers, practices, and lessons. So use that resource. Use it in your newsletters. When you are busy and the church administrator is on you for your newsletter article, just pick a practice out of here and use it for your newsletter, your Facebook pages, up to 5 out of there. Our UCC devotionals from Pilgrim Press every year are fantastic. I have also intergenerationally asked people in my congregation to write devotionals for an Advent book every year. We've used children as young as 5 all the way up for those Advent devotionals. So use that if you feel creative in that way. I also want to lift up Bread for Our Journey. If you used the Marcia McPhee Worship Design Studio theme last year, this was the additional supplement for faith formation that she included, and it was fantastic. Every week you got an email from Bread for Our Journey that included a whole swath of resources for people of all ages to use during that week of Advent. If there was a little juice box next to it, that meant that it was for people of all ages, especially for families to use. Something I really appreciated about that was they center voices on the margins, queer voices, voices of color. That was a fantastic piece that just supplemented our Advent last season so well, and they're doing it again this season. So check them out. Bread for Our Journey. Yeah, I think that's about it. Back to you, Tom.
And we're going to move into questions and responses, but I want to add one other resource is Cloth for the Cradle, which came out of the Iona community. It's beautiful prayers if you like the Celtic spirituality traditions. So we call this questions and responses because we had a keynote speaker at an event that said instead of questions and answers, because they didn't know if they had answers, they would prefer to call it questions and responses because they could respond. So I invite those of you who are using some Zoom interface, go ahead, put questions in the chat. I'm going to try to lift up as many of those as I can. And panel, just so you know, we've got a little more than 10 minutes for this. So what questions do you have?
Tom, would it be okay if I responded to one that came up earlier that's been in the back of my mind?
Yeah, I was going to point that out. Go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. I think it was someone named Brian asked the differences in how you approach, yes, is there an intergenerational difference regarding expectations about Advent, especially between youth and elderly? There seem to be different approaches and interests. I would agree with that. Just from what I said earlier, that families, this is the busiest time of year. Anything that they can use on the go or an event that's held at the church that is important to them and their traditions, that's what they're going to get. Whereas people who are empty nesters, have a little bit more time on their hands, can come and they want to be part of community during that time of year. So there's nothing wrong with having multiple things during Advent, but to just adjust your expectations and the reality of who's going to show up and what you can do and what you're willing to do with your time and energy during this season. But I do think there are different expectations, and to just be intentional and aware of that.
Perfect. And can I add to that too? Yes. So one of the things that I like to do is just find the common ground when it comes to holiday season. And typically, if we're just being honest, the common ground is food. When it comes to Christmas, Thanksgiving, Halloween, all of this, right? So find a way, or this is just a suggestion, find a way to create a recipe that goes through the Advent story. That is a lovely activity for families to do. Bake a Christmas cake. And, the cinnamon can be, the dirt that Mary ran on to, get away, but just be very creative. Also, I do want, if I may, just uplift 2 more resources as well that I didn't get to. One thing that I do love is the Action Bible, because it brings the Bible to life, and the children love that because they're able to see themselves within the text. And the second thing is Dr. Ann Wembley has Children's Sermon, a book called Children's Sermon. If you ever struggle with children's moment like I did when I first got out of seminary, I highly recommend. And maybe you're not necessarily one that will go and buy a book and you need like a digital space. On Facebook, there's this fantastic group called Be the Bridge, and they always drop resources within that group. But I don't want to necessarily discount Facebook too. So join Facebook communities as well, because the digital communities are just as great as in-person communities. So yeah.
I want to say, and this is doing a great job in the chat and getting all of these resources there. And there will be an email that goes out with a list of all these resources. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say we can probably also get that on the AUCE website, so you can collect it from there. This is also being recorded and will be available for review. Literally review it. I'm not seeing questions coming up in there. Oh, there's something specific that you've done during Advent that you consider a must for the season. I'm going to go ahead and start here. I also, in addition to a lifelong career in faith formation, had a career in circus clowning and clown ministry. And I wrote this skit for Advent. Each week I came in with a gift wrapped box, and I did some playing with the Advent wreath and played with kids, and then opened it up, and inside was a puzzle piece. And at the time I made it out of foam core. If I were doing this now, I would go do it out of insulation board. And so each week was one piece of the puzzle, and the fifth piece of the puzzle for Christmas Eve was in the shape of a cross. And the front face of the puzzle was a smiling face. It was very simple and everybody knew it was coming, but I'd also painted the back of the puzzle. So I got somebody to help me turn it around, and it said, "God so loved the world," over the picture of a globe. I don't do it every year. It is something, though, that comes to my heart every year, and I feel, is this the year that I must do that again? How about using foam puzzle pieces? Yeah, that's what I'm describing. A squishy foam might work. Yeah, experiment with it. Start in June and see how it works.
I would just like to add that every year we've been doing it for, I've been at my church for 36 years, but we call it the hanging of the greens. It is a rite of passage for our 5th graders, but I could see how you could change that for an intergenerational experience, and maybe offer families or youth and deacons to come down the aisle and decorate the church and learn with the pastor describing all the parts that are happening, holly and the ivy and the Advent wreath and the Christmas rose, all of that. So we do that every year, and it's something that, like I say, it never gets old. It's always beautiful, and it retells all the symbolism through the season.
Brian has asked, is this a good time to try to connect with non-churchgoers around our community, or should we focus mostly on the members who are already active? This is the perennial question all year long, every church activity and every church season. But Scott, you raised your hand. Go ahead, enlighten us.
Non-churchgoers, because churchgoers already know about Jesus, okay? They already know, they have the hope of the Advent story. And I don't necessarily want to say churchgoers, because I hate that term too. But I think the Advent story, it goes beyond the church, even unto Epiphany, when the 3 wise men who were not Jews came to visit Jesus. This is a story that captured inner faith. This is the time for us to believe in the Jesus, the way, but it's all of us coming together to recognize that, hey, even though you may have a part of God, I may have a part of God, you may have a part of God, none of us got all of God, you know? And this is the beauty. Advent is the beauty of bringing the community together, because Advent is the resource of the church to bring us together. There will be no church without any Advent. So to the question, Brian, I think that Advent is the perfect time, the perfect season on the liturgical calendar to go out into the community, and don't necessarily wait for them to come to you.
This is the time to focus on churchgoers, because the mystery of the incarnation takes some deep faith to engage, and to remember the promises that led to the birth of Jesus and the promises that Christ will return takes some deep faith work. And this is the time the congregation is ready at this time of the year to engage that kind of faith work more than they are at other times of the year. It's a both and answer, right? Scott, I loved what you said. Kim, you look like you were going to answer also.
Yeah, just really quickly, you might be the open and affirming family that somebody is looking for, that they can't go home to their family during this Advent and Christmas season. So just keep that in mind, especially if you're an open and affirming congregation. There are people who don't feel safe going home, can't go home and be who they are. And you can be that community for somebody.
Kristen, you're the only one who hasn't spoke. Do you want to?
I did mention about the hanging of the greens, and then also I love the tradition of using the paper whites because it really allows all ages to sit, wonder, and watch, and then receive the gift of this beautiful blossom, and to realize the symbolism and then this Christmas story.
We've had a couple of comments in the chat that I want to raise up. One is that a congregation doing the hanging of the greens during COVID, where families were invited to come in and do their part at an assigned time. And another is about building a nativity scene week by week. That's an ancient tradition that works so well. And they're saying maybe the first week is empty, maybe week 2 adds the shepherds and sheep, 3 and 4 question marks. I would say go with the lectionary, because I use the lectionary. There's so many rich opportunities here. Thank you for engaging us in this. Part of the reason AUCE board members are where they are is that we learn so much by being out with you. And so we appreciate you all being here. Kristen, the paper blossom that you're mentioning.
Oh, right, the paper white. It's a paper white bulb. You can get it online. And it's, you can buy bulk, so you can package it up and just hand them out to the congregation. Takes about 6 weeks to blossom. It's an indoor experience. So you would, of course, it's during the winter months, put it in a vase with marbles or stones. And I just tracked with my families. They gave me pictures. So when they began the task, and then every several weeks, and I posted them on Facebook, and it was just something to really share. And even what I loved about the story is if they were delayed in a week, then it blossomed for New Year's. And if they were delayed a little bit longer, it was on Epiphany. So it was just an experience waiting to happen.
And one final comment from the chat of having the wise men slowly approach the manger throughout the Advent season. And when I've done that, they arrive at the manger on Epiphany Sunday. Thank you again. And Roberto, I'm going to turn this back to you. Thanks for being our host.
Dear Tom and Kristen and Scott and Kim, thank you so much for this great conversation. I mean, my pad is full of notes of, you know, Dr. Wilden Gaffney about the women's lectionary of the whole church, you know, Tracy Smith, Faithful Family Advent, Action Bible, Intergenerational Building of Gingerbread Houses. Oh my God, I didn't know you were in clown ministry, Dr. Tom, you know. so much I wrote. I'm sure everybody else was writing down. So, right, all these resources will be available on the YouTube under the screen, and please share the YouTube channel, this conversation with all your networks. That's why we do this here in the United Church of Christ. Thank you all. I knew this was going to be a great conversation. Got me all excited. I'm getting ready, especially, as a pastor of a small church back in Worcester, Massachusetts, we did exactly that for having to wise the Magi go slowly to that. And of course, we celebrated Epiphany. That's when they landed at the nativity scene. So all these ideas are great. So thank you so much. And thank you for attending and being with us here at Thursdays for the Soul. Again, we are so grateful for you being with us. And with that, I put it back to you for a blessing, Dr. Tom.
And also to remind you that the AUCE website is auce-ucc.org. Now, even as we depart, may God nudge our spirits closer together. May we each encounter greater hope, delight, and wisdom. We now depart in peace. Amen.
Beloved in Christ, if this conversation has moved you, if what's been offered here has helped enhance your ministry or your soul, please consider donating towards the annual fund of the United Church of Christ by texting UCC to 41444. Your support will help programs like this in the essential work of the United Church of Christ. Thank you for your support. Be blessed into the rest of your day and know that you are not alone. We are holding you in prayer. Amen.